Cassette 2. Chapter 3, Adolescence. Page 33. Recording numbers. Step 1.
We all know from experience that children grow up at different rates, both physically and emotionally. Physically, gender accounts for the most significant difference in growth rates. In general, men end up taller than women. But that's not how it begins. Girls usually enter adolescence earlier. They start to get taller, and their bodies begin to mature sexually before boys do. We're going to make a graph showing typical growth patterns for adolescent boys and girls. You'll draw one line for James, a boy, and a second for Sarah, a girl. Now, to make this graph, you'll need two different colored pens or pencils, or one pen and one pencil. Before we begin, complete the key next to the graph to show which pen or pencil will be for James's growth and which for Sarah's growth. Are you ready? Look at the graph. As you listen, make points on your graph. Later, after you finish, you can connect the points with a line. We'll begin with James. When James was 10 years old, he was 4 feet 10 inches. He grew slowly until the age of 14, when he reached 5 feet 1 inch. Then he began to grow taller very quickly. By age 16, he was 5 feet 8 inches tall. By 18, he was 5 feet 11. He continued to grow taller. And by age 21, James was 6 feet tall. He reached his full adult height, 6 feet 1 inch, at the age of 22. Now take a moment to connect the points on your graph. Now you have a record of James's adolescent growth. Okay, now let's record Sarah's growth. Sarah was 4 feet 9 inches at age 10. Then she began to grow taller at a rapid rate. By age 12, she was 5 feet 4 inches. Her growth continued and she reached 5 feet 8 inches by the age of 15. She continued to grow, but more slowly. By age 18, she had reached her adult height of 5 feet 9 inches. Now connect the points, which represent Sarah's height at different ages.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 3, Adolescence, page 35. Listening for specific information. Script writing. Step 2.
I'm talking to Eric and Jorah. Jorah, how old are you?
13.
Okay, 13. So that means you're in what grade?
8th.
Okay, so 8th grade. I'd like to ask you about your father. Can you, think of a time when you wanted to do something and he said, absolutely not?
Well, yeah. Just last night, my girlfriend and I wanted to go to a concert downtown that was at 10:30. And he had to be somewhere early this morning, so he didn't want to pick us up. So I said, well, you can take us over there, and we can take a cab home. And he didn't like that, so...
Oh, yeah.
Which I completely understand. But, you know, last night I wanted to see it from a different perspective.
See, I think 2 years from now I'd feel okay about it.
But anyway, now, you say you're willing to see his point of view about last night?
Definitely.
Yeah. Are there some times when you can't see his point of view?
Yeah, there's definitely times I can't see his point of view. But I think last night he was right.
Let me ask you, Eric, how much freedom do you give Jorah?
Well, I like to give Jorah as much freedom as I think she's shown me she's capable of handling.
As much as you think she can handle. So, how does she show you that she can handle more freedom?
For example, if I ask her to do something over a certain course of time, it gets done, or by showing that she can be home at a certain time. Or if there are cases where there's a dangerous situation, that she's acted responsibly. You know, even if the minimum thing is just to telephone me and let me know.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 3, Adolescence, page 36. Listening for main ideas. Step 2, page 37.
Jorah, what about things like what you wear and makeup? Does he put his foot down on things like that? Or...
You know, it's very hard to go shopping with him sometimes. He doesn't approve of all the clothes I wear, of course. And he wants certain sizes, and we've gotten in a few really, well, not pleasant fights over clothes. And
on the other hand, don't you feel like in general you're wearing the kind of clothes that you'd like to wear? Well, I mean, it's not like when I grew up and my parents just said, you're not going to wear bell-bottoms, period. And I didn't get them. I remember my parents really being worried that I was going to turn into... They thought I was going to somehow come under the influence.
They wanted you to be one of...
Well, they didn't want me...
to be a square.
To be a hippie.
Yeah?
And they didn't want me to be involved with drugs.
Yeah?
And I'd say I certainly shared that concern. I don't want Jorah to be part of a drug culture.
Yeah.
Because I think it's part...
Or wearing gang clothes or something.
Yeah, and mostly, I guess... Well, what I'd really like is Jorah to dress like herself.
How does Jorah feel about that?
That's fine. I mean, I don't really want to dress like a gang person anyway.
So, and, what about makeup? Do you wear makeup? You're not wearing any now, are you?
No, I'm not wearing any now, but I do wear it. I wear it to school, and my dad has really loosened up a lot on makeup. He realizes that just because he says no, I'm not gonna not wear it.
Yeah, last year she was putting it on at school and not telling us. I think it's better to be open about things and discuss them. So, as Jorah says, I've loosened up on makeup, because I'd rather she not do things behind our backs. I mean, I think she looks nicer without it, so...
Do most of your friends wear makeup?
Yeah, some people don't, but most of them do.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 3, Adolescence, page 37. Summarizing what you have heard. Step 2.
So you say Eric's what you'd consider pretty strict, but pretty fair? So, for example, when he tells you to do something...
Well, he's strict, and I get angry when he doesn't want me to do stuff. But afterwards, I can almost always see why he said it, you know?
Yeah.
And there's only a couple of incidents where, well, that were totally, you know, that I didn't understand at all.
Not a bad record.
No, because I'm sure I've made some mistakes.
How would you compare your mom? Is she less strict than your dad?
Well, she's less strict, but it's like I can't win, you know? The stuff that my dad's not strict about, my mom's strict about. And the stuff that my mom's not strict about, my dad is. And, well, like, my dad doesn't let me see PG-13 or R movies, but my mom does. She rents R-rated movies and lets me watch them and all, but my dad won't even let me see PG-13.
Well, that's not really true. It depends on what it is. My rule with PG-13 is either I've had to have seen it first or, you know, talk to someone who I trust who's seen it.
So your mom's looser about movies. Well, what's she stricter about?
Chores. Junk food. Buying me specific things.
When you say buying you things, do you mean...
Like, when we go to the store.
She doesn't want to pay for them?
She doesn't want to pay for things. She wants me to buy my own friends' presents. You know, stuff like that.
So, do you get an allowance?
Yeah, I do.
So, Jorah, what do you think about your dad? Do you think he's a pretty good dad? I mean, how does he compare with your friends' fathers?
My dad is very strict, but he's pretty good. He's very nice, and he lets me do just enough so I don't get too angry.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 3, Adolescence, page 41. Note-taking, using space to show organizational structure. Step 2, page 42.
Now, the other common problem of adolescence that I want to speak about has to do with school performance. And that could be failing classes, acting out in class, or simply not going. Now, there are a lot of reasons for these different problems. Sometimes there are younger siblings at home who take up a lot of the parents' energy. And even though this is a time for teenagers to become more independent, they still need to know that they can rely on their parents to help them through the difficulties of adolescence. So whenever an adolescent comes into treatment with this sort of problem, we try to involve the parents immediately. And often the teenager will respond very well to having the parents become more involved in not just helping with homework, but in taking an interest in the teenager's life. So the teenager is really letting the parents know that more attention or more structure is needed. Now, what I mean by structure is that the parents have a clear set of rules about what behavior is expected, and they follow through with discipline if the child fails to meet those expectations.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 3, Adolescence, page 43. Note-taking practice. Step 2.
I'm going to talk about a couple of common problems of adolescents, teenagers, whom I see in mental health treatment, namely drug and alcohol abuse and problems at school, including acting out, poor academic performance, and truancy. Now I'm going to talk about some of the reasons for each of these problems, and then about what we might do in treatment with these kids to see what started the problems and how we can solve them. So, first of all, one of the problems that we see fairly frequently is teenagers who are addicted to alcohol or some other kind of drugs. Now, why do adolescents fall into drug and alcohol abuse? In my practice, most teenagers with severe alcohol and drug addictions, not just recreational use, but severe long-term addictions, are children who have either been physically or sexually abused, or both. And these children have such intensely negative feelings about their abuse or about themselves because of the abuse that the only real way they feel they can escape from or blunt their feelings is with drugs or alcohol. The course of treatment for these children is long and difficult, and a hospital stay is usually necessary for them to detoxify. And during that time, and also afterwards, an intensive series of classes or group work is needed to help the adolescent develop the coping skills to resist the urge to go back to drugs or alcohol. These groups usually consist of people who are also in treatment or recovery programs, as well as other adolescents who have recovered from substance abuse and have been able to maintain a period of sobriety for at least a year. Once a teenager has gotten past the 30 days or 60 days of detoxification that they need, depending on the degree of addiction, that they need in order to face therapy with a clear mind and body, the teenager is now more ready to talk about their feelings and about their abuse. If it was sexual abuse, they might feel guilty that they got a lot of special attention from their abuser. They might feel very angry and want revenge if it was physical abuse. Now, it's very important in the early stages of treatment that the therapist give them permission to feel any feelings that they have, whether they're socially acceptable or not. A person in treatment of this kind is very unsure of himself, and so a great deal of the therapist's support consists of non-judgmental acceptance, helping the adolescent to give names to their feelings and permitting them a long period of time to experience them. This is critical because drugs and alcohol basically blunt the mind from being able to experience anything directly. We usually find that if a teenager is able to go through several months of this non-judgmental supportive acceptance and therapy and remain sober, their chances for staying away from drug or alcohol abuse in the future are fairly good.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 3, Adolescence, page 44. Note-taking practice, step 2.
Now, the other common problem of adolescence that I want to speak about has to do with school performance. Failing classes, acting out in class, or simply not going. Now, sometimes this will begin to happen in a class where the student trusts the teacher. So often a teacher will be the first person to ask if there's something wrong and to refer the student for counseling. Or the problem may not be noticed until the student gets failing grades. Now, there are a lot of reasons for these different problems. But overall, this is one of a teenager's first ways of letting someone else know that there's something wrong at home. Sometimes there are younger siblings who take up a lot of the parents' energy, and even though this is a time for teenagers to become more independent, they still need to know that they can rely on their parents to help them through the difficulties of adolescence. So whenever an adolescent comes into treatment with this sort of a problem, we try to involve the parents immediately. And often the teenager will respond very well to having the parents become more involved in not just helping with homework, but in taking an interest in the teenager's life. Now, of course, in some families, the parents need to become a little less involved in their teenagers' activities and give them a chance to prove themselves on their own. But there are other times when the teenager is really letting the parents know that more attention or more structure is needed. Now, what I mean by structure is that the parents have a clear set of rules about what behavior is expected, and what's equally important, they follow through with discipline if the child fails to meet those expectations. So, for example, if a child does not do well in school, the parents will allow the child to receive a failing grade rather than at the last minute doing the child's homework for him or her. And then they will talk about the problem with the child. So there are many times when a parent is doing either too much or too little for an adolescent child. And one of the main jobs of the therapist is to help the parent find the appropriate level of involvement. Many of the problems that teenage clients bring to us in counseling have to do with their parents and with their home lives. And I don't think that this is any accident. Adolescents are struggling with who they are and what they can do on their own, and they still have a certain amount of need to belong to the family as a basic source of identity from which their own individual personality and independent identity can grow. If the adolescent's family life is severely disrupted or is not functioning in a way that provides this basic nurturing, this sense of identity, then the teenager is going to have difficulties developing his or her own individual sense of self.
Now complete the steps in your book. This is the end of Chapter 3. Now please fast forward to the end of this side and turn over the cassette to continue. Chapter 4, Adulthood, page 47. Recording numbers. Step 1.
Listen as I ask 8 friends of mine what age they think is the best age to be. Complete the information in the chart as you listen. Bruce, how old are you?
28.
28. Okay, well, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the best age, the best period in life?
For me, it's these years. Late 20s, I think.
Yeah, late 20s?
Yeah.
Julie, may I ask how old you are?
I'm 25.
25. Okay. And may I ask what you think the best time of life is for you, in your opinion?
I think the best time of life is when you're a little child.
Oh.
The ages 4 through 8 or so, 8 or 9.
Huh. Anne, can you tell me how old you are?
I sure can. I'm 57. I always have to stop and think.
57, okay. Well, what I wanted to ask you about today was, what do you think is the best time of life? The best age to be?
Oh, the best age to be. Wow, that's a great question. Definitely not a teenager. I think the worst time, if you'd asked me that, was 12, 13, 14, 15. I think that's the most difficult time. The best time, I think, is probably maybe in your 30s.
David, may I ask how old you are?
40, almost 46.
And the question I want to ask you is, what do you think is the best age to be? Or do you have an age that stands out in your mind as the best age?
Well, physically, I'd like to be, somewhere in my 20s. But mentally, I think I would probably have to say I'm happy to be the age that I am.
Otis, can I ask you how old you are?
70.
Okay. And my question is, what do you think is the best period of your life? What's the best age to be? What was or what is or what will be?
Oh, golly. I have to think about that. The best period. Well, professionally, I think the best for me was like 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Mm-hmm.
Gene, what's your age?
71 last week.
Okay, and Laurie, how old are you?
I'm 68. 69 next month.
Okay, and so the question I want to ask is, what do you think, what is the best age to be? How about you, Laurie?
To be the age you are is the best age to be. So I love the age I am right now.
Well, were there any periods in your life that you enjoyed more than others?
Yes. My 40s were wonderful.
And Jean, how about you? What do you consider the best stage to be for yourself, the best period in your life?
Gee, I don't know.
Lolita, first I want to ask you, how old are you?
I'm 77.
Okay, 77. And the question I want to ask you is, what do you think is the best age to be for you?
Well, I look back at special times in my life, and, the period between graduation from college and getting married was wonderful for me.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 4, Adulthood, page 48. Answering true-false questions. Step 2, page 49.
Okay, Bruce, why is the late 20s better than, say, earlier 20s?
I think that when you're in the early 20s, you're just getting over teenage, adolescent years. So now, I think in the late 20s, you kind of know a direction. But the early 20s are just too... You just kind of remember too many things of the teenage years, and you're still trying to get a plan. But in the 20s, late 20s, you kind of know what you want to do. And you kind of have an idea of how to get it. And you know how to settle down, too. You can see a plan for getting things and also settling down.
Is there a time in your life that you think you would call the most difficult time?
Probably the teenage years, like 14, 15,
Yeah?
16.
The mid-teens.
Yeah, I think the mid-teens were the worst.
So, Julie, why would you like to be a little girl again?
I think lately, because the age I'm at now, I feel is kind of a stressful age.
Huh.
When you're younger, you don't have as many worries and responsibilities.
Yeah?
you don't have all the stresses of life as an adult. I think at the age I'm at now, when you get out of college and you need to find a job, and I'm single and I can't depend on my parents anymore, and I have new responsibilities, just trying to get used to having new responsibilities and also figure out what I want to do, there's lots of decisions. I don't always know what the best thing to do is. Those are things that I need to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Anne, why was being in your 30s good?
Because in your 30s, you pretty much know what you like and what you don't like, and you're kind of settled into life, and at least for me, that was a really good time. Actually, now that my sons are married and they're independent, when I come to think about it, I probably do more interesting things now for myself than I did when I was in my 30s.
For example?
Well, now I'm playing in an orchestra, which I would never have had time to do when the boys were little, and I read a lot more than I did.
Do you and your husband go out more?
We do. We go out to movies and we go out to dinner, and we hope to be able to travel.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 4, Adulthood, page 50. Summarizing what you have heard. Step 2.
So, Otis, professionally, your early 40s were your best time, you say?
Yeah. Well, actually, I would say maybe from 35 to about 50.
Why was that?
I was much more receptive to new ideas. I lectured better. I read a lot more. And I was very interested in doing certain things in a different way. Because when I was 50, actually, is when I created about 4 courses that had never been taught at the university here before. I just come to the university and I created all those courses and taught them regularly. And most of them worked.
That's great.
But I think in terms of feeling mature and responsible and sensitive to the world around me, I think the last 10 years have been the best.
Okay. So what was so wonderful about your 40s, Laurie?
Well, because, I had basically educated myself, because I got my master's degree during my 40s, and that was a very exciting time. I really enjoyed that a lot. And my children had grown up, so I was beginning to feel free of a lot of my responsibilities and commitments, and I could focus on my own work, which is painting. And I also started studying music, which was really great because I hadn't done that before. And I met some wonderful people. It was a beginning.
So, Jean, you say you don't know what age is best, but is there any period in your life that you really loved more than others, or?
The older I get, the more I think about when I was younger. But that's probably... I think the older you get, the more you think about your youth.
And the more...
At least when you get past a certain age.
Yeah, and the more you value it, the more you miss it?
Yeah. You know, when you're younger, you can't wait to grow up. And when you're old, you think, what an idiot I was. And I should have understood that there were things that weren't quite so bad then, you know? But you don't know when you're younger. For instance, you get up and you feel, well, the world is terrific, you know? But when you're older and you wake up, you don't feel so well, you know? Your bones hurt and your joints hurt, and you gotta kind of, it takes a mental effort to get, and sometimes it takes like, Laurie and I always talk about how long it takes to get going in the morning, you know? In the Army, we used to get up and 10 minutes later we were out on the parade field, and now when we get up, we got to do our exercises, then we got to do our walk, and then we got to do our bath. I mean, it's like our job now. We don't have time to work anymore.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 4, Adulthood, page 54. Note-taking, paying attention to signal words. Step 3, page 55. 1.
By developmental tasks, I mean life changes that a person must accomplish as he or she grows and develops.
2.
What we expect at this point is for the young adult to be supporting him or herself completely. That includes financially, emotionally, and socially.
3.
The old relationship in which the child related to his parents in a hierarchical way, that is, solely as parents, this relationship changes.
4.
The result is that it's often very difficult for young adults to survive without financial assistance from their parents.
5.
So, as I said, it can be difficult for young adult children to establish financial independence from their parents.
6.
Of course, separation is the natural thing for adult children to do. But even though it's natural, this is still a crisis point in a family when a child leaves.
7.
So, we've talked about two of the important tasks of young adulthood.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 4, Adulthood, page 56. Note-taking practice. Step 2.
I'm going to speak about two of the major developmental tasks of young adulthood. And by developmental tasks, I mean life changes that a person must accomplish as he or she grows and develops. The young adult is in his or her early to mid-20s, and at least in Western culture, this is the time for the achievement of independence from their parents. Ideally, what's considered optimal at this point is for the young adult to be capable of supporting him or herself completely. Well, that includes financially, emotionally, and socially. Okay, so we could say that one of the major tasks for young adults is the development of a new and different type of relationship with parents. The old relationship, in which the child related to his parents in a hierarchical way, that is, solely as parents, well, this relationship changes in the young adult years. And a new kind of relationship is established, one based on mutual adulthood. This is the sort of culmination of a long process of separation that starts in early childhood. And ideally, in young adulthood, the child physically separates and goes his or her own way in the world. Interestingly enough, this is a change that seems to be happening later in life, in the latter part of the 20th century, partly because it depends on the child's ability to become financially independent. And in today's world, there is so much competition for jobs. The cost of living continues to rise. Well, the result is that it's often very difficult for young adults to survive without financial assistance from their parents. And so, Sometimes that means that they simply stay at home and live with their parents, well into their 20s. So, as I said, it can be difficult for young adult children to establish financial independence from their parents. And then establishing emotional independence can also be a difficult process, and not all children separate from their parents with equal success. Some children may never be successful at this. They may be forever in the role of child and parent forever in the role of parent. Of course, separation is the natural thing for adult children to do at this point, to leave their parents and to start their own lives. But even though it's natural, this is still a crisis point in a family when a child leaves, and some families don't handle it well. Change is a frightening thing for many people, but there's no escaping it. We all have to learn how to change throughout our lives.
Now complete the steps in your book. Chapter 4, Adulthood, page 57. Note-taking practice. Step 2.
And then there is a second task of young adulthood, which ties into this whole business of getting married. Erik Erikson identifies the period of young adulthood as the time when the young adult faces the crisis of intimacy versus isolation. Well, the theory is that in adolescence, the child has developed a healthy identity, and of course in reality, for a variety of reasons, many people fail to develop this healthy identity in adolescence. But again, ideally then, in young adulthood, this identity is ready and able to be joined with another, traditionally in marriage. This involves the ability to make a commitment to someone in a close, intimate way. Now, according to Erikson, healthy people during this period are able to compromise, to sacrifice, to negotiate, all of which one must do to make a marriage successful. This, then, as I said, is a second major developmental task of this period. The ability to adapt to another person in this way will increase intimacy or closeness and connection. Now, the inability to do this will leave the individual alone and self-absorbed. So, there you have intimacy or isolation. And the challenge for the young adult is to resolve that crisis. And as I said, success depends on the young adult having developed a solid, healthy identity in adolescence. It's difficult to give yourself to another person in a relationship if you do not have a self to give, if your self is not defined, if it is not solid. And it puts great emotional stress and strain on a relationship when two people are in the process of trying to deal with the developmental tasks of marriage, when they haven't yet dealt with the important developmental tasks involved in just being a separate person. That, ideally, should come first. So, the developmental task of solving the crisis of intimacy versus isolation, we traditionally associate this task with marriage. But let me say that increasingly in the West, staying single has become an acceptable alternative to being married. People who in the past might have felt pressure to marry in their early 20s, right out of college, may now have more freedom to be single for a longer period of time. And with this is the freedom, for example, to take more risks, to move to a different part of the country or to a different part of the world. And there is also, with the divorce rate as high as it is, a certain reluctance, a skepticism about marriage as an institution. As a result, many young adults are waiting to get married until their late 20s or older. And in fact, the statistics show that couples who do wait till their late 20s to get married have a much lower divorce rate than those who marry in their early 20s. So, we've talked about two of the important tasks of young adulthood. The first, separation from parents, which involves renegotiating one's relationship with parents. And the second, solving the crisis of intimacy versus isolation. That is, bringing a solid sense of oneself to a relationship with another person. And the degree of success with which the young adult accomplishes these tasks will determine, to a great extent, their future success and satisfaction in life.
Now complete the steps in your book. This is the end of Chapter 4. The program continues on the next cassette.